What's going on, everyone? Chris from Pickdawgz.com here with your college football breakdown for week 5. We're going to go over 10 games from Saturday's action on September 28th, 2024. If you like this content, make sure you smash that thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you're looking for my best bets, the games that I love, including my daily $19 best bet, my weekly college football platinum play. I'll tell you, I'm going to have a lot of plays I like for this week's college football action. Head to pickdawgz.com, click the premium picks tab at the top of the page. You can find, our daily packages there. And for me, I can only speak for myself, but sometimes those long-term packages, especially on the Saturdays and the Sundays, the 3-day and 7-day packages are actually less than buying each of the daily packages individually. It'll definitely be like that on Saturday. So definitely something that you want to make sure that you check out. But like I said, we got our college football breakdown for this week. Didn't have the best week last week. I'm going to be fully transparent with you guys. I think we went like 2-8 or 3-7 in last week's breakdown. Sometimes these rough weeks are going to happen. Do our best to nail every single play that we're going to give out here. I like a lot of the games I'm giving out today. So what do you guys say we hop into it? Let's break down this action. Let's get right into it. Our first game comes to us from Ann Arbor, from the big house, is Michigan hosts Minnesota. Michigan laying 10 points. Total set at 35.5. This one's going to be at 12 Eastern on Fox. And, the thing about Michigan, they've, got the win over USC last time out. And it was a very competitive matchup. I wasn't all that high on Michigan going into that game, as I thought Alex Orji wasn't necessarily going to be an answer at quarterback for the Wolverines, but he was serviceable in what he was asked to do, and that was lead the ground attack for Michigan. And I think that that's what Michigan's going to try to employ here. And you can have some success against a Minnesota, defense that their strength is their pass defense, and that's not what Michigan is going to do anymore with Alex Orji. This Minnesota defense is slightly susceptible on the ground. They're a middle of the road defense. They're allowing 3.8 yards per carry. I think that's what Michigan's going to do here. But also, don't look now. Minnesota has a bit of a passing game, more than we're used to seeing from the Golden Gophers over the last couple of years. I like what Max Brosmer's brought to the table for Minnesota. And if you're Minnesota, you can also pass on this Michigan defense. Sure, this Minnesota offense has been really nothing to write home about. They're 104th in total offense, 94th in yards per play, but they are stronger in the pass game. And Michigan's pass defense, 101st nationally in passing yards allowed per game. They are top 25 in yards allowed per completion, but I still think that, Minnesota is going to be able to contribute enough here. I think Michigan's definitely going to score enough to help get us up and over this total of 35.5. I think these totals are just a little bit too low. I think that, the value is going to be on the over until these totals hit, the high 30s, low 40s. So give me the over 35.5. I think it's still the same boat I'm taking with these low total games. 21-17 gets us there. So give me the over 35.5 between Michigan and Minnesota. Next, we head to Carter Finley for a matchup between NC State and Northern Illinois. NC State laying 7.5, total set at 46.5. I've seen the total, actually the line between 7 and 7.5. Do your line shopping. This game's going to be at 12 p.m. Eastern on the CW. And, I think Northern Illinois simply, the long and short of it, got caught with their pants down. They bought into their own hype after that road win over Notre Dame. They had a bye week to also even let it sit even longer, just here for an extra 7 days, how great that win was. And then all of a sudden, you take on Buffalo at home, a Buffalo team that had nothing to lose at that point, and Buffalo took Northern Illinois to OT and ended up winning that game outright. So it's sort of back to square one for Northern Illinois, but I think this is a favorable bounce back spot to at least be competitive. NC State, if you're looking at NC State, the one thing you have to keep in mind here is the health of Grayson McCall. He is questionable for this game. The Wolfpack have said they're going to take a day-by-day approach with McCall. But even when McCall was playing, against the good teams, NC State was getting blown out. They've given up 51 and 59 to Tennessee and Clemson. And even in the games that, they've had against inferior competition, games against teams like Western Carolina and Louisiana Tech, the Wolfpack didn't cover in either of those games. And, they've had a tendency to let those bad teams, or those inferior teams, I should say, hang around. So I think NIU could do the same here, especially if you're getting it at 7.5. I like the value of the points with the Huskies in this one. Now we head to Winston-Salem for a matchup between Wake Forest and Louisiana. This one's going down at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ACC Network. Wake laying 3.5, total of 60.5 in this one. And, for Wake Forest, I think that this could honestly be the most trouble that Dave Clawson is in his tenure at Wake Forest. I mean, you go from a team that made, 7 straight bowl games to last year. I get it. It was a step back season at 4-8, but I think this team could honestly finish even worse than that. And now you got a matchup against a Louisiana team that could have easily beat Tulane last week. Now, granted, Louisiana hasn't necessarily played the toughest schedule, but they've scored at least 33 points in all 3 games this season. And it's not like they're going up against much tougher here. I mean, this Louisiana team, I think, is the better team on both sides of the ball. Wake Forest, yes, they've played teams like Ole Miss. They've played Virginia. But even though the Ole Miss numbers may have skewed things a little bit, that 40-6 loss, the reality is that Wake Forest defense, 126th in total defense, 117th in yards per play, 102nd against the rush, 124th against the pass. Louisiana can do enough in this game to give themselves a shot to win it outright. And I would even venture so far as to say this game should be a pick'em, if not Louisiana favored on the road. I'm not there with this Wake Forest team. For me, you see Hank Bachmeier as a quarterback, a guy who couldn't cut it with Boise State. And I mean, last year couldn't cut it with Louisiana Tech. I see Hank Bachmeier. I go the other way. I'm taking Louisiana plus the 3.5. Now we're going to South Bend for another matchup for Notre Dame against an ACC opponent, as you've got Notre Dame taking on Louisville here. Notre Dame laying 7, total set at 45.5. This one's going to be at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Peacock. And Notre Dame in the last couple weeks has beat up on Miami, Ohio. They beat up on Purdue. They routed Purdue 66-7. And this was in, the revenge tour after that loss to Northern Illinois. But I wasn't all that impressed with what I saw from, Notre Dame against Miami, Ohio last week. Maybe it was just a stepping stone game as they were preparing for Louisville. That's all well and good. But season long, realistically, I haven't been that impressed with Notre Dame. I mean, even if you include the numbers from that 66-7 blowout of Purdue, this is still a Notre Dame offense that's just outside the top 50 in terms of total offense. They are a decent rushing offense. They're top 20 in rushing yards per game, top 5 in yards per carry. But that's the strength of this team, and you're going up against a Louisville defense that's held their own. Granted, yes, Louisville hasn't necessarily played the toughest of schedules either. They played Jacksonville State and Austin Peay, but they held a great Georgia Tech team in check in their last game. They got the cover in that one. And Louisville is still a top 20 stuff unit in terms of stopping the run. Top 25 in total defense, top 20 in yards per play. So I think Louisville can hold their own here. And I like that Louisville has an experienced quarterback on the road in Tyler Shugg, who has been able to hold his own. Shugg last week, 13 of 19 for 269 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game against Georgia Tech. I think this is a game where the points are going to come into play. I think this is a 3 or 4 point game if Notre Dame wins it, like 23, 24, 20. So give me Louisville plus the 7 in this one. Now we head to Jordan-Hare for a matchup between Auburn and Oklahoma. This one's going down at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. It's a pick'em with the total set at 45. And the preseason line for this game was Oklahoma minus 2.5. And that wasn't factoring in how bad Jackson Arnold was going to be in spots, and that the fact that Oklahoma was going to have to make a coaching change. I'm sure if you told a lot of Sooner fans that this is how the start to their SEC tenure was going to go, probably wouldn't have been too happy. Auburn, on the other hand, they've been flip-flopping back and forth between Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown. It's that old saying of if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have 1 quarterback. And Brown struggled last week. 3 interceptions, turned Peyton Thorne. But the thing is, Thorne came back in, 2 touchdowns, an interception, 213 yards, even in a loss for Auburn. But I think this is a spot where Auburn can bounce back. The thing for Oklahoma is that Jackson Arnold's been terrible. You turn to Michael Hawkins, and that's got a lot of Oklahoma fans excited about the future. Potentially this could be the guy to lead the charge. But for Hawkins' first start, his top 5 receivers are all banged up or out. I mean, it got so bad that now Deion Burke is now listed as out after being put on the list as questionable earlier this week. So for me, I look at this game, and even though Auburn has a hell of a road trip coming up against Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky in their next 3 games with a bye week sandwiched in between, I think Auburn can't afford to lose any opportunities to kick a team when they're down and pick up a win at home while they can, especially with, like I said, this gauntlet of a road trip coming up. So I'm going to take Auburn. I'm going to take Auburn on the money line in this one. I just can't trust Oklahoma in this spot. Now we're going to Allegiant Stadium for a Mountain West matchup between UNLV and Fresno State. This one's going down at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on FS1. UNLV laying 2. Total set at 49.5. And this total has been all over the place, obviously, with the news coming out earlier this week that Matthew Sluka, deciding that he's not going to fulfill his commitment to UNLV after an NIL dispute. So, he's gone from the program, and that's caused this line to go haywire over the last couple days. But here's my thing. If Sluka was really that important to this UNLV program, they would have found the money and they would have been willing to pay him. But the reality is you look at Sluka's numbers so far through, a lot of his games. I mean, look at some of the stat lines. Against Kansas, 7 of 18 for 86 yards and touchdown. In the win over Utah Tech, 8 of 17 for 3 touchdowns, 161 yards. Even the win against Houston, 6 of 13 for 71 yards. I know that he's a dual threat quarterback, but so is Malik Williams, the quarterback that was the QB2 on the depth chart, but was the QB1 in the offseason. He has a rapport and he has, a history with these receivers. So it's not like there's a drop off for UNLV here, who's played the tougher schedule and has beat 2 power conference teams on the road this season. I'm not knocking what Fresno State has done by any stretch. They went on the road and played Michigan earlier this season, but their wins Sac State, New Mexico State, and New Mexico. So for me, I got to go with UNLV at home here. I still think that there's a path to the Mountain West title for UNLV. I think they can get it done here. I'm going to take the Rebels in this one. Now we're heading to Clemson for a matchup between the Tigers and the Stanford Cardinal. Clemson laying 21.5, total set of 57.5. This one's going down at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. And Clemson, what's woken up in this team? Outside of that loss to Georgia, it looks like that game was just about more how good Georgia is and not necessarily how bad Clemson looked in that game. I'll tell you, I was on App State. The following game, Clemson beat the crap out of App State in that one. And then you wondered if it was a one-off, if App State was really that bad. No. Clemson came out and, beat the dog crap out of NC State in that game as well. My concern with laying 21.5 here, though, is that that hook scares me. And, it's not to say that I don't think Clemson can win and cover this game. I think they absolutely could. But we saw, Clemson take their foot off the gas in that fourth quarter against NC State. They were up 59-14 at the end of the third quarter, and it ended up being 59-35. So for a Stanford team that's going to get a lot of possessions this game and give up a lot of possessions to Clemson, I mean, this is a Stanford offense that's top 25 in pace and play. I think the over is way too low here. I think this is not giving enough credit to what Stanford could do, or the fact that Clemson could once again just take their foot off the gas. It could also be that Clemson could hit this total on their own, but like I said, we've seen Clemson just beat the crap out of App State and NC State in the last 2 weeks. This is a Stanford defense that's not very good. It hasn't been in the first year and a bit of the Troy Taylor era. But on the other side, Stanford has been competitive against teams like TCU and Syracuse so far this season. So we'll have to see. But I'm going to go with the over 57.5 in this one. Now we got the big one from Bryant-Denny Stadium, as you got Georgia heading out on the road to take on the Alabama Crimson Tide. This one's going to be going down at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC. It's a heavyweight fight, It's a rematch, and it's a revenge game for Georgia, and that is why I'm looking at the Bulldogs here. Don't get me wrong. This is a solid Alabama team. They got great quarterback play. They have great players all across the field. They are well coached with Kalen DeBoer. But this is the first real marquee spot for Kalen DeBoer as Alabama head coach. And that's not to say that he can't hold his own here. I mean, this is a coach that took Washington to the national title game last year. The problem here, though, is that, like I said, it is a revenge game for Georgia. A Georgia team that doesn't forget. They heard what Jalen Milroe said about how this team basically quit on the field. They didn't want any more of Alabama in that SEC title game last year. And like I said, there's a lot of guys coming back for Georgia that remember those comments, and I think they're going to come out and deliver a message here. This is going to be a physical matchup. It is going to be a game where these two teams trade blows back and forth. But in the end, I trust the continuity for Georgia here. And you got to remember, this is a Georgia team that, yes, was in a white knuckle brawl against Kentucky last week. Almost lost that game outright. They won that game 13-12. But this is also an Alabama team that was sort of held in check by USF for a good portion of that game before they sort of opened it up in the fourth quarter. I think this one is a revenge spots that Georgia has had circled since last year. So give me the Georgia Bulldogs laying the point, or just take them outright on the money line. Now we're going to Gerald J. Ford Stadium for a matchup between SMU and Florida State. This one's going down at 8 p.m. Eastern on ACC Network. SMU laying 6, total set at 47.5, and well, Florida State finally got one. They beat Cal 14-9. But my thing is that it doesn't excuse the fact that this is still a Florida State team that is still 1-3, and a Florida State team that still believes in DJU as a starting quarterback. And while there have been times where I've said, it's not his fault, it's also just Florida State as a whole, he's still, the launching spot for a lot of what's to blame for Florida State this season. And realistically, let's call a spade a spade. Sorry to steal a turn of phrase from Jay Briggs, but let's call it like we see it here. Cal should have lost that. Florida State should have lost that game. Cal should have won it, but they missed 2 field goals that, hindsight being 2020, obviously would have been the difference. It would have won that game 15-14 had those 2 field goals gone through. I know I've said, already in this breakdown that, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have 1 quarterback, and that's what sort of SMU is dealing with Preston Stone and Kevin Jennings. But we're starting to see Kevin Jennings emerge as the number 1 in this, as the QB1, I should say, in this battle. And this is an SMU offense that is still just outside the top 30 in rushing yards per game. They're not necessarily the best passing team, but you can run on this Florida State defense that's 89th nationally in rushing yards allowed per game. Florida State's offense is nowhere near good enough to be able to contend in this game. They're 128th in total offense, 130th in rushing, 131st in yards per carry. I don't know how this total is in single digits, especially after SMU hung 66 on TCU last week. So give me SMU here, less than a touchdown. I can't believe it. Now we head to Rice-Eccles for our final game on the breakdown. Utah laying 7.5 total, set at 47 as they take on the Arizona Wildcats. This one's going to be 10:15 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. And Kyle Whittingham's going to continue to play the will he or won't he game with Cam Rising. I've taken the approach going back to last year of I'm going to assume Cam Rising's not playing, and if I surprisingly see him on the sidelines, if I'm backing Utah, cool. It's just going to surprise me if he doesn't. And if I'm not on Utah in that game, I'm just going to be like, oh, well, so what? But the thing is that, and doing the layup session, I've started to catch myself saying things that Jay and I say back and forth, and I'm applying one to Utah here. Isaac Wilson's done a good job filling in for Cam Rising, and all Utah's asked him to do is not crash the car. And that's exactly what he has done. He's filled in admirably. He was key in the win over Oklahoma State on the road. And that's exactly it. I just think that all he has to do here, Isaac Wilson, is not shoot himself in the foot with this Utah offense. I think they'll be fine because he doesn't affect the defense. And the defense is going to be key for Utah in this game because we just saw Arizona get exposed by Kansas State. And that was with Fafita and McMillan playing well. But if you take away Noah Fafita's top option, Tedero and McMillan, this Arizona Wildcats offense becomes a lot less scary. And this is a Utah defense that can definitely do that. Rice-Eccles is where opposing teams' offenses go to die. And while, Utah's defense isn't a world beater, they are still top 35 in pass defense, top 30 against the run, top 20 in total defense. So I think that Utah can slow down Arizona here, and I think Arizona's in for another rough game on the road. I'm going to take Utah, and I'm going to lay the points in this one. That is it for another college football breakdown. Week 5 going to be in the books after this one. I appreciate each and every one of you for joining me, taking the time out of your day so I can put you on some college football winners. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, the games that I absolutely love, head to pickdawgz.com, click the premium picks tab at the top of the page, grab a daily package. You can grab my best bet of the day, or I'm going to have multiple packages for throughout the day. But I'm telling you guys, the best value is to hop on something long term. I said it earlier in the breakdown before we got into the games. The 3-day and 7-day passes a lot of the time are cheaper than buying each of the daily packages on these days where we have tons of games on Saturdays and Sundays. So definitely something that you want to make sure that you check out. Make sure you guys drop your college football picks in the comment section below. And yeah, if you like this content, let me know. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. Again, I appreciate each and every one of you. Let's crush the books. Let's kick some butt.